Coming up next on Insights on PBS Hawaii, what can the 2014 legislature do for Hawaii? Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Malia Maddock. The 2014 legislature will convene next Wednesday to spend 4 months debating thousands of bills. What pocketbook issues will our lawmakers focus on this year? What's in store for public education, social services, public safety, and the environment? Tonight, we bring together a cross-section of Hawaii's policymakers to offer their thoughts on what the 2014 state legislature should do for Hawaii. We invite you to join our conversation by calling, emailing, or tweeting your questions and comments. Now to our panel, which is slightly different than planned because 2 guests were unable to join us at the last minute. We thank everyone who is here with us tonight. Chris Lee is the state representative for Kailua and Waimanalo. Chris is chairman of the Energy and Environmental Protection Committee. He also sits on the powerful Judiciary Committee, as well as 3 others. Sam Sloan is the sole Republican among Hawaii's 25 state senators and serves as the Senate's minority leader. Kaniela Ing is the youngest of Hawaii's state representatives at age 24. Kaniela was elected to the legislature in 2012 and recently caught people's attention with a compelling floor speech during the same-sex marriage debate. Blake Oshiro is Deputy Chief of Staff to Governor Neil Abercrombie. Blake represented Aiea for 11 years in the Hawaii House of Representatives and had been serving as Majority Floor Leader when Governor Abercrombie asked him to join his administration in 2011. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for being with us. So tell us, what are going to be the headlines from this session? Chris, can you start by telling us what sort of scuttlebutt are you hearing?
Well, I think it's what is on the mind of the public right now that we take up. Right now there's a lot of talk about what's happening with erosion on the North Shore, homes falling into the ocean, Kailua beaches eroding. There's a lot of this going on around the state. Also, I think there's a lot of focus on solar and what people can do to get PV connected to their homes, and there's been a lot of talk about that lately, so we're going to be addressing that.
Kaniela?
Going off of last session, there are some bills that may have needed a little bit more discussion, and I think this session we can help tie up loose ends. There's some debate about how to address growing income inequality. That's really a nationwide debate that's being brought down to the states. Hopefully we can see that some measures to help address that. There's, of course, the GMO debate. Should they be labeled on the state level, and other issues that is facing the county. Eroding shorelines is huge on Maui. Also, a huge spate of shark attacks recently in my district. Maybe there could be some state solution for it. Maybe not. Maybe just some public outreach and education. But definitely issues worth exploring.
Sam, your thoughts?
We had more than 10,000 people come down during the special session, and many of them are not registered to vote. Many of them had never been in the Capitol before. They all got a lesson in democracy or lack thereof. And so I think one of the concerns is going to be, if those people stay together, if they still stay committed, there is the question of erosion of personal rights, constitutional rights, and the ability for people to get involved and do things. We're the only state in the union that has neither initiative, referendum, recall, or term limits at the state level. And so those are going to be issues that we're going to discuss. But we also have a supplemental budget, and the governor's asked for even more money, so that will be on the front burner as well.
Blake, what are your thoughts?
I think for us it will be a lot about the budget after we've had the 3 years of the recession where we've been cutting a lot of programs and having to do a lot of reductions and looking at tax increases. Now we're actually at the point where we're not going to be doing that. There are no proposed tax increases from the governor, no fee increases from the governor, and we actually have a very healthy, positive balance. And so now is the opportunity for us to look at where we want to invest and put our money in good programs to make sure we have right growth, but we also want to make sure that we store up and build up our reserves so that we can withstand these economic fluctuations in the future.
So how much of a conflict do you guys anticipate coming this session over whether to spend it or save it? Is that going to be sort of a big issue this session?
I don't think it'll be too big of an issue. I mean, the current leadership of the House and Senate have shown a willingness to store away money to address unfunded liabilities. That was their mantra from last session, and I believe it'll continue this session. The administration is on the same page. And so once you agree on that, then the issue is what do you do with the other money that's still there? We don't have collective bargaining on the table anymore too much, and so it really is an opportunity to look at programs.
You talked about the thousands of bills that we're going to look at during this session, and while the governor may not be proposing tax or fee increases, other individual legislators will. So that'll be something that we have to look at. The unfunded liability that Blake is talking about is extremely important. It's approximately $25 billion. We are number one in the nation in terms of unfunded liability, primarily with our state employee retirement system and the health system. The administration did make a good faith effort last session, to start paying that back. But even at the amounts that were approved by the legislature, we're talking about a 30-year period to pay that back or pay it down. That's very unlikely because there are still so many voices and so many people trying to grab that money. So that'll be the debate.
So you mentioned taxes and fees. Is there any issue on the table this session that you think is important enough to look at a tax or fee, or do you categorically oppose any increase?
Well, my position is different from my three Democratic colleagues here, of course. They like spending, they like taxation, they like employer mandates. The fact of the matter is, Hawaii suffers from not being able to grow its economy or expand or diversify. Our number one economic driver is the visitor industry. Until December 2012, our number two economic driver was called Daniel Inouye, who accounted for at least $450 million a year. We don't have that now. In the governor's budget, for example, I attended the hearings last week, the preliminary hearings, and they want to start a new program, a new office to try to capture or retain federal military and federal expenditures. They also want a new office to be a buffer between the failed Hawaii Health Connector and the insurance industry. So I think it's a constant battle of trying to grow government bigger, and unfortunately the people of Hawaii are suffering right now. I disagree with my colleagues that share the opinion that the economy has turned around, that we've turned the corner, and I think the Council of Revenue's meeting last week where they reduced their projection for this year is indication that in fact we have not. But talk to the man or woman on the street and they'll tell you they're struggling, and I think that's something that oftentimes people in the big square building don't understand.
So before we move on, just really quickly for my curiosity, would you categorically say no to any increases in taxes or fees this session?
Yes, I would. Categorically,
no.
Because I can't see the need for more of that. I do see the need for reducing spending and having the government live within its means, just like Mr. and Mrs. Hawaii have to live within their means.
Any thoughts in terms of the projections being overly optimistic?
No, we think that the actual growth that is shown through the Council of Revenues is something we agree with. It's showing that, yes, tourism numbers are softening, but at the same time you see increases in construction, and so that's helping to buffer that loss. Overall, though, our financial plan is based off of the idea that we don't need the continuation of any of the taxes that were imposed during the recession. And so there are a bunch of these taxes and fees that were imposed that there were sunsets placed on them. And so they are automatically set to expire the next year or the next 2 years. And our financial plan is going to be able to withstand that and let those things die away. And so we're very hopeful that we'll see the economic growth continue.
So for people watching who are saying, give me some good news, what are you guys going to do for me? One item is that some taxes will be sunsetting and going away.
Yes, the income tax that did increase as well as capital gains.
Well, there is a major election this year. There possibly could even be a different governor, and there certainly will be a different legislature. And so one legislature cannot bind a future legislature. And even if you pass legislation with sunset provisions, they can be changed. And oftentimes in the past we have seen that. The legislature is reluctant to reduce or eliminate taxes once they're in place.
And I'm so sorry, we have to say to viewers that we do have a technical problem right now, and we are aware of it and we're working on it, so please stick with us. And in the meantime, for those who can hear what we're talking about, Kanialo, you mentioned that there was some unfinished business from last session. Can we talk a little bit about that? I'd like to hear everyone's take. What from last session will carry over that you are hoping to get resolved this session?
Sure, but let me respond to some things. I don't think that Democrats, especially in Hawaii, are across the board looking to spend more and tax more. Actually, if you look at the numbers, I sit on Finance Committee, we're actually one of the most conservative budgets in the entire nation. You can compare us to Tea Party states, and if you break it down per function, because we don't have education in the counties, we actually spend a lot less per capita than you'd probably expect. Our Finance Committee, we refilled the rainy day fund, our hurricane relief funds. Just because there's money now, it doesn't mean we need to spend it. We're trying to be as prudent as possible to best utilize these funds and make sure our credit rating stays high and that we can pay off future debts. And the debts we have right now with our retirees, we're not, I don't think anyone in leadership, I'm certainly not supporting a pension tax. And other little taxes that are proposed, like sugary drinks, I'm not necessarily supportive of that either. So
and I
think
the question for you guys is, if we have come out of the very bad economic situation we were in, what do we do now to prepare ourselves for the next time that comes around, right? What can we do to be in better shape than we were in 2009?
I do think there's a lot we can do. I would disagree with a good colleague from Hawai'i, Kai. I think it's easy to paint all Democrats with the same brush, and that's absolutely the furthest thing anyone should be doing. Because you talk about growing the economy, which I totally agree, that's one of our priorities that we need to move on. But we cannot do it simply by saying no to everything and cutting everything. We've got to be responsible. We've got to look at all the options on the table and figure out how best we can move ahead. Some things that we need to do to stimulate the economy, to grow sectors like construction, renewable energy, to look at agriculture, what we can do here, require some state investment in order to make sure that we can take those steps needed to be taken to help the farmers, to help the folks in the solar industry, to help those people create new markets and new jobs. They can use that assistance.
So let's get into specifics here for people who are listening and want to know what is going to change, what am I going to see out of this session. What can you guys tell me that we might be seeing that will really make a difference for people's lives?
Well, going back to one of the things we were just talking about a minute ago, a lot of folks have noticed that solar photovoltaic installations have gone through the roof. We've seen year-over-year growth doubling for the last 5 years. It's now over a quarter of the entire construction industry. It's a huge boon to Hawaii, and it saves people a lot of money on their own electric bills. And it is one of the only ways people have been able to step off the $300, $400 a month electric bill and control it for themselves. And we're going to need to be able to make sure that we can move ahead. There have been a lot of concerns that the industry itself has been set back by a number of challenges. People having problems connecting to the grid, people finding out that they have tremendous lines and waits to be able to do this. So we need to figure out what these technical challenges are, work with our utilities, make sure that we can move forward, and that's going to take some tweaking and some legislation to be able to do, and we intend to do it.
So we are getting a lot of national press coverage right now about this conflict, if you will, between solar and HECO and the grid. Senator Sloan, in some states, it's been Republican politicians who have actually come out swinging for the solar industry against monopolies, if you will. Any thought on that happening here in Hawaii?
Well, I've introduced legislation every year to deregulate our largest monopoly, and that is Hawaiian Electric. Hawaiian Electric gets paid with everything that's done. The ratepayers that don't have solar are subsidizing those that do. The state has spent $1 billion or more on tax credits and subsidies for solar. That's what's driven the construction. It's not really an economic boom or economic diversification. It is based on subsidies. It's based on tax credits. Let me say at this point, one of the people that we're really going to miss is Lowell Kalapa, who unfortunately died right at the end of 2013. Lowell Kalapa was the taxpayers' watchdog. He was the person that came to both the House and the Senate, had very clear, concise information, which disputed a lot of the things that the administration and the majority party have said. We are not diversifying our economy. We are not done with this recession. And so when we talk about things that we should be doing, we invite business people down to our hearings every year. They tell us what we need to do in terms of creating jobs. And then we thank them for coming, and we do exactly what we've done for the last 10 or 15 years.
So let's get into the specifics in terms of what we're going to get done. In terms of business and business people's concerns, one thing that might be on the table this session is minimum wage. Can you talk about that?
Well, sure, absolutely. I know I presume there's just three main arguments that people make against the minimum wage. This is something that passed both chambers last year, died in the last second, so hopefully we can see it pass this year. And people like to say that it will stifle businesses, it will impede their ability to innovate or grow, and that it will cause more unemployment. But there's really not a lot of evidence for that. We see states with very high unemployment and very low minimum wages. We also see states with very low minimum wages and high unemployment. And there's actually studies done with neighboring cities that have those exact numbers and with many other variables controlled. Of course, it'll cause some kind of, or reduce some profits for corporations perhaps, but we really got to balance like how much utility is going to provide these workers or how much benefit will it provide the greater society. Right now, to me, it's a moral question. As a society, are we okay with seeing people that are working full-time, sometimes more than full-time, 2 or 3 jobs, and they're still impoverished? To me, that's very dismaying, and it's something we need to resolve right away. And minimum wage, it hasn't been this. I think if you look at compared to the 1960s and adjusted for inflation, it's very, very low. We'd have to raise it $4 or $5 to get back to those levels, and we're only asking for a modest 2.
Do you think we'll see an increase in the minimum wage in this session?
I hope so. I can't speak for all.
See, I have to agree with my colleague here that this is a moral issue. The moral issue is whether or not the government should force people to pay something that is not related to productivity. And with all due respect, most of my colleagues in the legislature have never met a private payroll in their lives. And it's a lot different if you are in business. Let's forget about the big corporations. Let's talk about small businesses.
If I can interrupt you for a second. Again, we want to apologize for the technical difficulties, and we are working to solve that problem, so please bear with us. Let me ask a few questions from viewers. Is there any talk of legislation that would provide tax incentives to new corporations to register their companies here, similar to Delaware? Has anyone heard any talk of that? A viewer's question, no.
No, we've talked about that over the years, but not recently.
Okay. Any chance tax incentives for tech startups to help build viable tech sector in Hawaii?
There has been talk about that over the years. You know, we've had a grand experiment over the last decade or so with Act 221, which provided similar funding, and unfortunately there weren't adequate metrics attached to it, and it was very difficult to actually figure out what impact it had directly. And so if we're going to do something, the talk that I've heard at least is figuring out which industry we want to help, how do we put the money in there, target it so it's going to be effective, so that there's metrics so we know that those dollars are well spent, so that every dollar invested returns multiple dollars over back to the people of the state. And we've got to decide this year exactly where we're going to do that. And there's digital media we've heard a lot about, other sorts of high-tech startups. And it's not just there. You could venture out into other nascent industries that really have a chance to grow, even into the agricultural sector and other places where people need just as much help with new technology and developing new business models.
High chance of passing, low chance of passing? What sort of sense do you have of that actually making it through?
Well, with Sam's support, we can pass anything.
Absolutely.
Just on that specific question very briefly. So the governor's budget does have $6 million for a high growth initiative. Last session, the legislature generously gave us $6 million. That $6 million has been a 4-time multiplier with private investment. So we have $25 million that's now been put in startup companies. So we want to continue that growth. Second thing we have in our budget is $7 million for a high-tech manufacturing bridge. Oftentimes the problem that a lot of high-tech companies have is they get money for R&D, but they're not able to translate that into the next step with manufacturing. And so we're asking for $7 million for that program.
You know, when Blake says that the legislature generously gave this money, the legislature doesn't have any money. It only has the money that it takes from the taxpayers and the people working here. And I have a real problem with some people in government that think that they are wise enough to select those businesses within those industries that are going to do well. All we have to do is look at the record of the Obama administration. All we have to do is say the word Solyndra and the other 25 failed businesses. When you're doing that, when you're taking money away from certain businesses to give special favors to other business. A good business wants a healthy business climate, wants a fair and equitable way of doing business. They don't need special favors, and we do harm to the entire economy by doing that, in my humble opinion.
All right, here's another question from Stephanie in Waikiki. If tourism is so important, why don't we ban fishing in Waikiki to allow tourists to see our beautiful resources? Any
It already
thoughts?
is a marine life conservation district 9 months out of the year, so there's only 3 months where it remains open, and that's even subject to seasonal regulation. So most of the time it is banned.
Any thoughts in terms of, I have heard a lot of sort of chatter about, I think spearfishing just opened, how quickly the fish populations seem to deplete. Any thought in terms of increasing the amount of time that the reefs are protected? Any talk on that?
There's efforts actually throughout the entire Pacific region, which a number of nations have signed on to, and it's looking at how we increase our natural resources in the nearshore marine environment, among other places. And you're talking about reefs here in Hawaii, where often the existing fish population is down to a small fraction of what it once was, 5% in some places. In some places, particular species are extinct completely. If we can open that up and figure out a way to work with our fishing community and all the other folks in the area to make sure that we can, in a traditional Hawaiian sense, balance our interests and continue to keep a sustainable population there, I think that's huge.
Right.
I think
there are so many responsible fishermen who are trying to accomplish just that.
Absolutely,
right?
and it's a few that really tend to be the bad apples that make everybody look bad. But I think in Kona in particular, other places around the state, there's real examples of being able to sustainably set aside certain areas for periods of the year, much like we're trying to do with Waikiki, to make sure that those fish populations come back. It helps tourism, it helps our local fisheries, and it helps our next generation who want to participate.
Any thoughts on that in terms of Maui?
Yeah, I think part of the problem that we've been seeing with the recent spate of shark attacks have to do with the fisheries being depleted, and especially the pelagic fish population. So, any control that we can have to, or any way we can get that under control, I think we should at least explore this session.
Might see some bills on that topic, huh?
Perhaps.
Okay. Here's another question. This question is for Senators Sloan and Blake Oshiro. Is the legislature going to investigate the Department of Public Safety because it's a mess with inmates escaping and guards having second jobs while on duty? From Chester in Honolulu. Blake, you want to start with that? Any thoughts on that?
So there are internal efforts that are going up to clean up the public safety department. But if there are specific instances like that, I think that's something maybe the listener should let us know. That is something that would be highly disconcerting to us. Overall, I will say public safety has done a lot in terms of improving overall public safety and what we need to do to protect the public, but I'm not aware of any particular instances like he's raised.
Well, the Senate Public Safety Committee under the leadership of Senator Sparrow actually started hearings last year. We looked into some of the complaints and some of the things, and I think that will be ongoing. But boy, if we're going to talk about investigations, we have the State Hospital and the Department of Health. We've got the University of Hawaii. We've got plenty of things that we can investigate. And I think this goes to the heart of the matter about the public. The public is getting more upset with us because we're not solving these problems. We get a lot more whistleblowers than we ever got from various departments telling us that, why aren't you doing this? And I think oftentimes we get distracted by things like marijuana, physician-assisted suicide, gambling, which will all be talked about at the beginning of the session next week, but by the end of the day probably will not be adopted. So we do have these things that we should concentrate on, and public safety is one of them.
Any thoughts on public safety? I know that's for you.
I have a thought on addressing problems. I think one of the major problems worldwide is global warming, and because of Chris spoke about it earlier, Hawaii is #1 in the nation for the amount of solar we have, and Maui actually leads the way with 5.4% of all ratepayers hooked up to PV. So this is, and actually Senator said it himself, that this is only true because the state was involved. And I think those are the kinds of industries we need to focus on. There's a problem, and we need to do what we can to address it, move to renewable energies. And Hawaii is really leading the way, and it's been doubling every year since 2005. So only because of that growth and that leadership, in worldwide leadership, is why we're facing these kinds of problems, because we're pioneers, really.
So let's stay on solar for 1 second. Of course, there are homeowners out there, might be listening right now, who cannot finish their solar installation because of what's happening. What can be done on a legislative level to help those people and others who might feel frustrated right now?
For those homeowners who, especially who have invested the money into a system, they have it installed in their house, they're going through the paperwork, come to find out at the very end of the process that they can't connect, or they need to do an additional study with the utility to be able to...
Which is what's happening right now.
That's right, and that could cost thousands and thousands of dollars. One of the things we're looking at, and we've worked with the utility thus far to be able to try and figure out, is there technology, are there inverters and solar panels that would allow a safe connection to allow a lot more PV on the system? That is only going to go so far. I think we've bought ourselves a few months here. But beyond that, I think what we need to do is take a look at grid modernization. And so there's a bill that we're looking at which has two big components to it. The first is to ensure that any studies or any speed bumps in the process aren't going to be extremely costly. So the first guy who runs up past that threshold in his given community who wants to connect won't have to fund tens of thousands of dollars for a study for everybody else who's to follow. And that's going to limit to a reasonable cost the time and the cost of that. The second thing is going to be looking at what the utilities can do on their end to make sure that they follow through with a commitment to a true 21st century grid, making sure that all homes have smart meters installed, that the grid architecture itself is updated so that folks will be able to connect en masse into a grid that's going to allow everybody to generate their own power and everybody to save money.
Is there the political will to get those kind of bills passed in this session?
I think so. You know, we've had this debate for a couple of years running now, talking about tax credits and other things, incentives that have to this point taken us this far. But even now, even without tax credits, without a single dollar of tax credits, installing renewable energy pencils out because the cost of energy is so high. You know, 37 cents per kilowatt hour here in Hawaii, it's 3 times the national average, and the payback period is only a handful of years, even without the federal and state support. So it's a no-brainer. I think that's where the public wants to go, and that's where we need to go.
Let me give you a little different idea on that, because we had House and Senate hearings back in October, interim hearings on what the problem was, and the homeowners really were caught. Homeowners were caught because they had to take out loans to pay for this. The contractors were caught because they had to hire extra people and go to expense and buy inventory. The culprit in this, and there is a culprit, it's Hawaiian Electric and the monopoly status. They don't want people off the grid. They want to make sure that they get paid. The arguments that they made about it's a safety concern and all that, from my standpoint, it's a red herring. They changed the rules unilaterally in September. They didn't have hearings on it. They didn't talk to people about it. That's what cost people a lot of money. So Hawaiian Electric happens to be one of the biggest political players in this town, in this state. So when you say, do we have the political will? Well, you look at all the people that went from the legislature to positions in Hawaiian Electric, and maybe that's your answer.
Yeah. And just to tag on to that, I think I actually do agree with the senator in that.
Oh, no, please.
No,
okay.
there is a
what is the world
Oh, no.
coming to?
See, there you go.
There's a fundamental question when it comes to Hawaiian Electric in that they're both a generation and a distribution. Right. And really what they should be is just a distribution model. When we have so many opportunities for different types of generation for independent power producers, that should be where we're looking at instead of letting HECO control the generation. And so that is what hopefully we will have a discussion on, is separating those two models.
And hopefully we'll have them on the show sometime to let them give their side of it and let them engage in the conversation. Of course, we don't have them tonight. But it sounds like that's going to be a big issue for the session.
It's highly charged.
It is.
Yes, highly charged. I like
very
that.
expensive.
And here's a comment from Jack in Kaneohe, who says something should be done about high electric rates by not forcing Hawaiian Electric Company to use expensive low sulfur oil rather than the cheaper high sulfur oil. We would not notice the difference in air quality due to the location of the islands. I would imagine, Chris, you don't agree with that, I'm guessing.
Well, I can talk a lot about the different options out there. I mean, there are two chief concerns that we're looking at, I think, with regard to our energy policy. One is, how do we get a control on costs? How do we have solid energy security here in the state based on our own resources, which is going to save us money in the long term? And secondly is, what does that mean for the state, making sure that our communities are okay with the types of energy sources we're using, whether it's geothermal or wind power or solar or what have you.
Funny you should say that. Question for Chris, Sam, and Blake. How are they going to end big wind on Lanai? From Robin.
Well, you know, I can comment. Oh, did you want to?
Oh, I just know
in?
which Robin that is, but yeah, go right ahead.
Well, I think, not to get too technical, but in the latest round of assessments, what's being looked at now is not so much a big wind project on Lanai, but what we can do with our existing resources, with geothermal on the Big Island, which has a lot more potential, and with wind on Maui, which is being curtailed. So they're generating so much now that they can't use it all there. So I think the options now are looking at connecting Maui perhaps to Oahu, but that does not mean windmills perhaps on Lanai or Molokai. They have their own plans and their own communities, and that's a discussion that we're going to continue to have with them.
Is wind a hot topic for you on Maui? I know you guys have a strong wind presence, so.
Yeah, they're trying to move to, so it doesn't have to be so curtailed with the battery storage and how we can, because it mostly runs at night, and the solar mostly runs by the day, so we need to firm up our energy. So people are looking also at the southeast rift of Haleakala for geothermal, and now that's been kind of controversial because the fissures aren't as deep or as wide as the Big Island, so it'll take some opening up, which some people like to call fracking. But that's not necessarily is. So that will be a big discussion in my community at least. Yeah.
Just briefly to get to Robin's question. So I would say that the current owner of most of Lanai hasn't expressed any interest in wind in Lanai. So I think that would be one impediment. The second thing is we still don't have a request for proposal out from the PUC on the inter-island cable. And until we have that actually framed out and penciled out, we won't know exactly what models, whether it's going to be a hookup directly to Lanai or whether it's going to be a spoken wheel type of thing where it goes to Maui and then maybe as connections.
The majority of people on Lanai still oppose the cable and still oppose having the island covered with windmills. Problem is that the previous owner still supports that.
And I was going to say, forgive me if I'm wrong, but isn't the portion with the wind component separate from the new owners?
Correct.
Right, so it's bifurcated.
Yeah.
All
but
right.
when the guy owns most of the island.
Let's talk about this. Let's talk about the electric cable for a moment, because we're talking about technology.
Is this going to come up this session, you think? I mean,
yes,
okay.
I think it will. I think we'll be talking about it. We've been talking about it for years.
I don't think there's legislation necessary for it to happen. I think right now, as Blake had mentioned, there's an RFP that's going to go out looking at what those proposals are going to look like from those companies.
The problem is we get all starry-eyed and we talk about these things without really looking at the facts and the actual situation. I mean, people were talking about the undersea cable as if it's a piece of cake. Now, we do have undersea cables, but they're communications cables. They're not power cables. There's a big difference, and there's a big difference in cost. The estimates were up to $1 billion in cable. I took a look at it. I analyzed it, and I see between $1.5 and $2 billion. And it's a situation where you have a great deal of productivity lost. You mentioned about the battery situation. We all know what happens with what happened in Kahuku with the battery fire and all of that. There's a lot of steps that we have to go through. We're going to third base without touching first and second.
Would you propose something on this? Would it be something you are going to be actively involved with?
I think that we should listen to the people, particularly on Lanai and Molokai. And I think they were crossed over the first time, and people in Honolulu were making all the decisions. Neighbor Island people don't like that too much.
No, they don't. Okay.
And I agree with that.
For viewers who are just joining us tonight, we are discussing what should the 2014 legislature do for Hawaii. We are talking with State Representatives Chris Lee and Kaniela Ing, State Senator Sam Sloan, and Governor Abercrombie's Deputy Chief of Staff, Blake Oshiro. We invite you to join our conversation by calling, emailing, or tweeting your questions and comments to the number at the bottom of your screen. Let's get to some of those comments and questions. From Deborah in Makiki, consider solution to decrease traffic congestion on the freeway, decrease number of illegal drivers on the road, or toll the freeway during rush hour traffic. Has there been any further discussion? At one point there was in terms of trying to have better enforcement of uninsured drivers. There were some questions thrown out at one point in terms of it would be tied somehow to having to have proof or chip when you got your gasoline. Has there been any further discussion about that?
Not seriously.
No.
But it is a problem because we're talking about maybe 18 to 20% of drivers at any one time that are uninsured, and that would make a big difference in traffic and everything else.
Surely something should be able to be
The
done.
insurance industry has balked at that. And yet, when we talk about technology and we talk about all the things that we've been able to do, it really is not rocket science to be able to make sure that a person's insurance coverage is current.
Wouldn't the insurance companies want that because it would sort of motivate people to keep their insurance and get insurance?
Well, they would want it, but they don't want to participate in the costs of implementing it or overseeing it.
All right, another question. Will the legislature uncap the tourist accommodation tax in order to fairly compensate the counties for the increase of services the counties provide now that tourism is rising? From Linda in Kaneohe.
The administration, as we plan it, don't have any plans to take off the cap. We believe that the amount of compensation going to the counties is adequate. Actually, when you look at the amount that goes to the neighbor islands in terms of the tourism accommodation tax, it actually is more than their tourism income generates. So the big loser in that equation is probably the city and county of Honolulu. And so, but right now we don't have any plans on changing the formula.
And maybe this is a good time to mention in 3 weeks' time we'll have all 4 of Hawaii's mayors on the show, and they might have a different opinion,
sure they do.
right, on that one?
Sure they do.
All right.
Well, there will be a bill from the legislature, inevitably.
And do you think it has a chance of succeeding?
It has a chance of gaining a lot of neighbor island support.
The answer is no to that
No,
question.
you
So
don't
that's
think
like,
it does.
10%
All
of
right.
the votes.
Interesting. From Twitter, anonymous on Twitter, wondering what policy area will receive the most focus in the governor's legislative package.
For us, the biggest one that we are going to be advocating for continues to be early education and preschool. That is the probably #1 priority for us. We have a plan for 32 classrooms in various DOE schools, half of which are on neighbor islands. We're requesting $4.5 million for that. We're requesting another $2 million to increase family center independent type of situations. And we're requesting an additional $2 million for an expansion of preschool open doors. So we're looking for some modest expansions to address the 4-year-old gap of children. There's about 5,000 of which who will be affected by the change in the mandatory kindergarten age, and so we want to make sure those kids get educated.
I ran into a friend this morning actually who has a child who falls into this category, and she was saying, I don't know how to plan. Will this pass? Will it not pass? What do I do? Do you think there is a very strong chance that this will come out of this session?
There probably will be a modest change, but not what the governor wanted last year and not what the governor would like. And the advocates and the lobbyists for this program is not for 4-year-olds. It's for 4-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 2-year-olds, 1-year-old. And we're not talking early education. We're talking about subsidy, state subsidy. And at the hearing that we had in the auditorium last week, Senator Thielen asked some very good questions. How are you going to go ahead and select 32 classrooms when A, you don't have the funding from the legislature, and B, there's a constitutional amendment that everybody's going to vote on in November of this year, and that has to do with whether or not the state will be allowed to utilize public funds for private purposes. And if that doesn't pass, or the subsidy or the supplemental information doesn't pass, they're left with 32 classrooms. Then you got my colleagues that are very upset if one of those classrooms is not in their district. So there's a lot of politics involved. We're not talking education, we are talking about subsidies.
So you think this is going to be a tough one?
Well, absolutely, I think it'll be a tough one, but I think Blake is very skillful at navigating some things by, and at the end of the session, all my colleagues will be singing Kumbaya and saying how wonderful it was.
I think that was
hope
a
so.
compliment.
Yeah,
I think that's a
So
compliment.
just very briefly, the 32 schools were chosen based off of agreement with the Department of Education and principals.
There has been some press saying that there was some confusion, that some people felt that they hadn't been presented sort of a complete package. You feel that it is now a presentable, complete package?
Yes. The criticism last year was we requested money, we didn't have a plan. This year we came forward with a plan, and so the criticism now is your plan is premature because you don't have the money. So we're working through it.
Feeling a little frustrated. All right.
I think people are still questioning the plan.
The plan.
Yeah.
From Marion, Honolulu, unfunded mandates are looming very large over our state. Why should we taxpayers pay for health care costs for state retiree spouses? What can be done to change this so only state retirees receive benefits? Is that something that's even being discussed?
That is something that is always discussed. The issue is it would have to be only prospective, because under our Constitution, anybody that has a vested retirement right is considered to actually have a constitutional right to it, and the state cannot do anything to take it away. There's a Hawaii Supreme Court case called the Everson case, which said that you can't touch it once they're vested, and so if we're going to do anything with spouses, it would have to be prospective for new employees only.
And would that happen in an election year?
I would say it's unlikely this year, but it is something we continue to discuss.
The legislature did pass a bill 2 years ago, an act, that changes some of the benefits and reduces some of the benefits, again, for new employees, but it's not going to have that much of an impact. We're still stuck with that unfunded liability.
Any thoughts on that before I go on to the next topic?
Oh, we got to solve it because we're going to be around here for a very long time.
This is true. So let's talk about the fact that at your guys' age, you know, you are some of the youngest members, if not the youngest member. What sort of fresh hopes or fresh ideas do you think you bring to the session, and how hard is it to stay hopeful once, you know, just politics as usual starts?
Well, I used to be the youngest member, and then this guy came in and eclipsed me. But, you know, quite frankly, I think that we've actually, as a group, there's a lot more than just us who are relatively new, and I don't think it's age dependent, but rather new to the process, I think, often offers a new perspective on things. And I think we have made a significant impact in policy. You know, we've addressed issues that have never seen the light of day in some time, talking about GMOs and labeling, and quite frankly, today talking about climate change, which is a huge deal, which doesn't have an impact tomorrow on us, but it will have a tremendous impact not only on our state budget, but our economy and all of our lifestyles.
An increased environmental
absolutely.
feeling.
Yeah, you know, lots of every politician says that I want to talk about the future and I'm planning for the future, and they try to make it more or less abstract by saying, you know, where we're going to be 20 and 50 years from now. Like, I'll still be around 50 years from now, or hope so. And unlike, you know, some geriatrics like Chris here.
So let's talk about GMOs. Is that going to come up, or is that now sort of in the county's hands?
You know, the counties have, particularly I think Kauai and the Big Island, moved ahead with their own county level issues, mostly focused around pesticides. I think Maui is now taking up something. We had these are two separate, I think, distinct debates that we've had here at the legislature the past year. One is labeling of food, and I think the House passed a bill out last year which would require labeling of imported genetically modified food. The other side of the debate is pesticide use and what we're growing here locally. That is yet to surface in a big way, I think, but it may this year.
Okay, let's get to a few additional comments. Peter from the North Shore, has the panel considered lowering taxes? Any talk of lowering taxes?
Only my bills. I don't get any support from my colleagues on that, and that's why I made the statement earlier. I mean, you know, and if you don't believe me about the Democrats' position here, then look at national publications, national rating services that always rate us second or third highest in tax burden. They rate us 49th or 50th in business climate and all of that. By the way, I got to say something, since both my colleagues here brought up global warming and climate change. I think it's absolutely hilarious that we have this global warming research ship stuck now for 2 weeks in Antarctica. It's the summer in Antarctica. They were down there to show how the ice had melted and how we have less ice and all that, and they got stuck, as everyone knows, in 15-foot deep ice.
So you're not convinced there is global warming?
Absolutely not. Not people controlled. And if we look at long-term trends and everything else, the science does not support that. But it's wonderful to talk about. The governor was appointed to what, a national?
Yes, the
global,
White House climate change task force.
And if you want to talk about wind, hot air, come to the state capitol, because that's where it's all about.
Go ahead.
I would disagree, I think, vehemently with my colleague, Senator Sloan, on this point. You know, we can move past the debate of whether it's man-made induced or naturally induced. I think 99% of most climate scientists and other scientists clearly agree man has a tremendous influence in this. But moving beyond that, what's clear is that our oceans are rising, our temperatures are warming. These effects are happening, and we're measuring them right now. We had a hearing, in fact, today at the state capitol, looking at what the expected impacts on Hawaii are going to be, you know, 10 years down the road, 20 years, 50 years down the road. And what we're seeing is that they're tremendous. Already, to this day, in the last 50 years, we've lost 17 miles of beach here in Hawaii, or here in Oahu. That's 25% of the beaches on the island. This is happening statewide, and it's projected to increase rapidly, which means the erosion we're seeing at Kailua Beach, on Maui, on the North Shore with homes falling into the ocean is something we will have to deal with. And that's something that we plan to take a big stab at, because if we lose our beaches, we lose our economy, we lose our way of life. And that's something we cannot stand. And that's only the tip of the iceberg. We're losing our fresh water supply too as our trade winds adapt. These things are being measured now.
One of the benefits of not being the youngest member of the legislature is that you have the ability to look at things over time, over a period of time. And for every statistic that the climate change people present over a short period of time, you can look at the long-term trends and you find out that, in fact, there have been very little changes. Now, if you're talking about erosion And erosion is caused, you're not suggesting erosion is caused by global warming.
It's influenced by it very much so.
Oh, well, okay, then if you want to do that,
patterns.
we can talk about erosion, and we can look at what oceanographers have said, what the problems are, the man-made things that we have put out to try to control waves and water action, and that's a very real thing that you can look at. But when you're talking about some of these other trends, you've got to look longer term than I think we're looking at.
Just to get to Peter's question real quick, so the governor will be proposing some tax credits to offset costs for seniors, middle and low income seniors, particularly those on fixed incomes, because we want to make sure we assist them. And recently we were able to lower the unemployment insurance tax, the assessment that goes on to employers for what they have to pay for unemployment insurance. And so we're going to be adjusting that schedule as well.
So I have a question. Of course, the same-sex marriage issue became sort of such a historic, monumental move for this state. Do you anticipate anything in the legislative package coming forward that could have that kind of historic status, or was that a one-off for this administration?
No, I think the one thing that I would say is what you'll see and hear from the governor is he does have plans for spending some of the general obligation bonds so that we can actually put lands in open space in perpetuity, specifically in Turtle Bay. We want to make sure that that dispute has been going on for decades, and so we want to resolve that and make sure we continue that in open space. And we'll also be looking at some land tracts out in the Dole area as you drive out to Hawai'i, and keeping that in agriculture and open space in perpetuity.
All right. This is from Gilbert in Wailua. Will the panel, they support Senator Slum's most important statement that HECO needs to cease being a monopoly? Is that something everyone here would agree with?
Sure. Well, we think, I think it's inevitable that, what Blake spoke of, that it'll no longer be it'll be a distributor and no longer a producer. I think at least within my lifetime, we'll definitely see that.
Absolutely. I think even HECO itself acknowledges that its business model needs to change in the face of our requirements for our Hawaii Clean Energy Initiative of being 70% renewable by 2030, but more importantly because the market's changing. You have solar companies now that are offering battery storage at home. There are different technologies that are coming online which are removing people potentially from the grid in larger and larger numbers every year. And if their model of selling energy to people doesn't change to being one of managing a distributed grid, then they're going to be quickly finding themselves out of business.
And would they be the sole managers of the grid?
That's exactly the question. So there are a number of bills we have seen in the past from our colleagues and that we're working on, that I'm working on right now, that addresses this and tries to get, number one, what is the business model going forward of the utility? Are they viable through this transition? We got to make sure they are, because otherwise the state will have to step in and bail them out, because we can't not have electricity. Secondly, how do we make sure that they transition to be a company that fairly regulates electricity distribution? Is it they're generating power plants that continue to provide power indefinitely, or do we continue to allow distributed generation in many forms compete against itself for the lowest cost, cleanest energy?
Like, does the governor have a position on this?
Oh yes, he definitely supports the need for us to look at alternative forms of energy. The governor is a big believer actually in liquefied natural gas. I know a lot of people are not in favor of that, with the fracking issue and all of that. But we do believe that it is a very viable alternative energy source that can be used as a bridge to renewable energy future. And so that's what you'll be hearing us proposing.
See, part of the problem too has been whenever you have a regulated industry or you have a monopoly like Hawaiian Electric, and you have the state government guaranteeing them a rate of return. A lot of businesses would like that. They'd like to have a guaranteed rate of return. So when my colleague says, the government may have to bail them out, the government should not be bailing out Hawaiian Electric. It doesn't need bailing out. What we need is deregulation, and we need competition. The PUC has been lax in the past. In the future, hopefully there'll be a different direction. I think we all support alternative energy, but it means different things to different people.
All right, and again,
we would clarify that. I hope we don't have to bail them out. The whole point, I think, is to avoid that day coming so that we can make sure the utility's on track to truly transform into a distributed grid of the future before we get to that point, before the market forces them out of business.
All right, and before we get to a few other topics, we, of course, would like to have HECO on and have them tell their side of this, which we don't have them represented tonight. All right, from a Kahuku caller, is Is the legislature going to do anything to help the film industry grow here? Can they have the film productions donate or help our schools in any way? Any thoughts in terms of further support for the film industry, which seems to be doing quite well currently in Hawaii? We have a lot of productions. Any further help needed from the legislature?
Well, we've increased
the tax credit last year.
Right.
It went from.
But we're competing with our primary competition is Louisiana and Georgia, and of course Toronto, and they have higher rates. So the question is, should we be continuing to increase tax credits and money that we're giving? Certainly, we've been very blessed with a number of movies, a number of TV series and all that. The question is, though, is that totally dependent on tax credits, or is it on the uniqueness of Hawaii? Now, what we really need to do is improve our aging infrastructure, and particularly our film studio.
All right. Does the legislature plan to do anything for cost of long-term care and caregiving for our seniors? You mentioned some help for seniors in terms of tax credits. Any other further help?
We definitely have a long-term care study that will be coming back. You know, previously under the prior administration, there was a bill that tried to impose a long-term care tax. It got vetoed, it didn't get overridden, and so since that time, the legislature hasn't really taken up the issue, but it is something that we definitely need to address, and so you'll be seeing the results of a study, I think, coming out very shortly that will propose a new model as to how we address long-term care.
The wonderful thing about Hawaii is we are the study capital of the world. Whenever there's a problem, there's a blue ribbon panel, there's a commission, and there's a study. And if you go to the Legislative Reference Bureau, they have a directory, a study of studies. We do these studies, and we do them over and over again. The problem is we don't do implementation.
Okay, we only have a few minutes, so I want to get to as many of these comments as I can. From Fred, you mentioned that more construction is necessary for continued growth. How much of the islands will we pave over with concrete and high-rises before growth is no longer a good idea? I guess this brings up sort of some of the issues surrounding Kaka'ako and how people envision Kaka'ako looking. Can we have a quick conversation on this? How hot of a topic is that going to be in the legislature?
I think a lot of people in my generation, they don't really want to live in that house way far away from where everything's happening, and you got to drive your car just to get to like a basic needs for groceries or just to get to work. They want to live someplace cool.
An urban core.
So lots of times people, like in Kihei, there's this giant mega mall that was proposed, an outlet strip mall, and economic development is going to get jobs. But to me, real economic development will come if you build a nice place where people want to live, walkable, greenways, bike paths, where you don't have to drive far, and when you do, it's a very, very pleasant drive, not a lot of traffic. These kinds of things can still happen in a lot of areas. Yes, growth is probably inevitable in some places, especially if we want to have enough homes that can support that I can afford and really reduce the demand.
So develop Kaka'ako in urban areas and try to keep the outlying green areas.
But it's all about smart growth. So yeah, if you look at cities like San Francisco and Seattle and places that people want to live, if you build it, then the businesses will come.
Okay, how about homelessness? From Stephanie, so many people are now living in our parks, beaches, roads. We've become oblivious to them, the constant begging on Ala Moana Boulevard. Are we going to see some homeless measures this session? Any thoughts?
Well, there's always measures. We've had commissions, we've had blue ribbon panels and all that. The problem is the government approach has failed. The government approach is one size fits all, and you've got, within the homeless population, you've got people with mental problems, you've got people with physical problems, you've got a lot of veterans, a lot of different groups. And
we are coming to the end of the show, so let's get into solutions. Is there going to be a solution this session?
No, there will not be a solution.
Anyone? Is there going to be any sort of substantive change or
Unless
bills?
we put all the homeless on the rail to nowhere and let them ride back and forth.
Any thoughts, Blake?
I mean, we will be putting in some proposals for additional housing for some of these homeless, but at the end of the day, that still won't be enough. And even if you did have enough room for them, a lot of them wouldn't want to move in there anyway for a bunch of the reasons that Senator named. So,
a continued problem.
Yes.
From Bernard in Waimanalo, has the legislature ever addressed the overpopulation in our state? It's the cause of most of our problems. That's a tricky one. I mean, how do you serve?
That's actually, it's a huge discussion on its own, but actually looking at where we want to go. Do we want to develop indefinitely, or do we want to focus on smart growth like Kaniela had mentioned? Do we want to keep adding lanes to our freeway, or do we want to retransition, that's not a word, do we want to transition to an urban model that helps folks live in a smaller geographic area so they're not driving 20 miles just to get to work? These are the questions that we have to ask today and to come up with a figure of where we want to be down the road. Plan 50 years ahead, figure out what resources we want to commit and what we want to save. The view planes, the ag lands, all of that. That still needs to be done.
And interesting from Lee on Maui, global warming will happen. We should stop worrying about what we should change now and worry more about what we can do to prepare for the future. Perhaps ominous thought, but you were saying that's one of the things that is being discussed.
That is one of the major bills we've been working on, looking at how we can actually enact an adaptation plan, which has yet to be done. We're one of the last coastal states in the nation to do that. I think if we start today, in a 2 or 3 year time frame, we can actually have actionable policies we can begin to implement to prepare us for 2050 and beyond.
All right, from Angela on the North Shore, the legislature administration should complete the conservation plan with Turtle Bay. It will protect our endangered species and alleviate traffic, and there are measures being done to that. Let's finish in our final minute. Maybe we could go around and everyone could give me, if you could have one thing be accomplished or come out of this session, 1 or 2 things, what would it be? What's on the top of your list? Blake, maybe we start with you.
Shore up our reserves, make sure that we have a strong economic backbone to withstand and be resilient in the future, and preschool.
Improve the business climate and reward incentive, but also we didn't even talk about protecting the children. We say everything we do down at the Capitol is for the keiki. It's not true. We've allowed our children to be abused and assaulted and everything else. We need tougher laws.
What would be the one thing you would do for business if you could have one actual substantive change?
I would end credits and subsidies and allow businesses to succeed on their own and allow the information that they provide us.
Okay, really quick.
Civic engagement is really important to me. We have the lowest voting turnout in the nation. Young people even worse, 18 to 25. I think it's absurd that we live in 2014. I can buy cars, airplanes, whatever. We can do our taxes, Social Security online, but we cannot vote or even register online. We got to fix that as soon as possible. Okay. Allow one-stop voting.
We need to say goodnight. Chris, I owe you a thought on the next show.
Oh, that's all right.
All right. All right, next week on Insights, Hawaii is known for its aloha spirit, the kindness, courtesy, and stewardship that by our Constitution should be part of our dealings in business and government across the islands. But some may say that Hawaii has lost that aloha feeling. On the next Insights on PBS Hawaii, what is the aloha spirit and does Hawaii still have it? That's next time on Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Malia Maddock. Ahui ho.